Hello and welcome back to the Changing the Narrative podcast, everyone. I'm the co-host, Dr. Gabriel Warren, along with Carl Benson. And believe it or not, we have made it to the end of our season one. So, Carl and I, felt like it would be good to be able to just take a moment and reflect and to talk about our journey over the past year and put together this podcast episode. And we also would like to just kind of share our gratitude for all the support that we've been getting. I know, when I go different places, it's amazing to hear people saying, "Hey, I've listened to your podcast," or "I've seen it on YouTube," and I really would like to take some time to just kind of, say that we appreciate all of those things and the feedback that we're getting, because it does really help us to shape the podcast and to come up with different topics to talk through. So, Carl, I don't know if you want to kind of do anything in your opening before we kind of get into maybe some topical things, but I'll let you do that for sure if you had something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'd only say thank you as well. I think that what we're trying to do here is, get out and sort of meet and talk to folks, Black men around the area and our networks or outside of our networks, and just sort of have that conversation that we need to have. And I think this first year has been fun, and I'm excited to get to this kind of little bit of reflection right now.
Yeah. So I thought it would be good to just kind of go back and like remind some of our listeners about why we started this journey. And
Yeah.
I know over the past year for me, I feel like it's evolved a little bit. I know when we initially started talking about this, we were really focused on like, man, how do we change that narrative of how people view us as Black men living in this country. But just throughout some of the interviews we've had and some of the feedback we've gotten, for me, I think one of the reasons why I also would like to continue with this podcast is because I feel like, yes, this podcast is for people who are non-Black, who may not have a whole lot of opportunities to engage with Black people. But I also think that it is also for Black people because, you know, some of us have grown up in areas where we may have been around a lot of our family or friends, or in communities where we're around a lot of Black people, and we don't realize that there are so many different experiences
Yeah.
to being a Black person. And I
Yeah.
think even individuals like that should be able to tune in and hear one of our guests and be able to kind of just say, hey, you know what, that's a perspective that I didn't know about because I grew up on this side of the tracks, or I grew up in this
Right.
part of the country or world, wherever. So I think for me, that was a big part of, wanting to start the podcast.
Yeah. I think I'm similar to that. I think part of you mentioned perspectives, and that was something that sort of I lean on is sort of making sure that not personally, I talk to different people. I talk to folks who are doing different things all over the country, not only career paths, but just I think from a Black man perspective, we sometimes get caught up. And, we always ask the question during a podcast is kind of what is that narrative we're looking at, or whatever that narrative we might want to change. And a lot of it takes just having those conversations with folks that we don't know, right? And from our listening standpoint, from our listeners, all the way to who we're talking to and who we're interviewing, it's all about sort of seeing those different perspectives take place, and hear their voices. There's a lot of through lines, right, from being just a Black man in general, but there's also so many differences that I think are really interesting. And that's where part of it for me, it was kind of like thinking of the impact that this podcast has had. And I know you mentioned about, maybe it's for folks that are non-Black or maybe non-Black men, but a lot of the feedback I've received is young people, right? So I do a lot of I'm in the mentoring space, 18 to 24-year-olds for the most part, kids going to college or whatever. And I always send them the link to our podcast, because I think for them, I'm in Minneapolis, but I think a lot of them, they don't necessarily know that there's so many Black men doing such great things. That's not entertainment, that's not sports related in some way, shape, or form. That's not a kind of a podcast or something along those lines of influencing. And that's what they've told me. Like 20, whatever, 24, 25 episodes we've done, there's so many men that are doing so many great things. And that's something that for me, I wanted to make sure that they knew. And they can sort of ask questions about that, or sort of just listen to the podcast and ask me questions or otherwise. And it's really been a fun time. It's really been a fun year for me.
before we go to the next topic, I think that's good. I'm glad you said that because, I think it is important for us to be able to give young people an opportunity to see stuff that they can go after. And I think oftentimes we forget about the fact that, you know, like in the 100 Black Men, the motto, what they see is what they'll be.
Yep.
And if we don't show our young Black men that they have the ability to do whatever it is that they want to do,
Hmm.
then some of them will never even have the person to come into their schools or their communities to be able to share with them like, hey, yeah, you can be this or you can be that. So I really do appreciate that because, you know, we are hopefully making an impact in that next generation to where, they'll be able to dream big and they'll be able to strive for things that maybe they wouldn't have access to
Right.
otherwise for this
Right.
podcast. So yeah, man, that's awesome.
Very cool. Yeah, for sure. Well, what kind of things have you found most impactful thing that we spoke about during our interviews or otherwise?
Yeah, yeah. For me, honestly, I think the biggest thing is what we just mentioned. There's been so many different Black men we've interviewed in spaces that I don't think people always imagine.
Mm.
When I think about one of the things, being able to sit down and interview one of our earlier guests, Sam Jasper, who works for NASA, and how he talked
Yep.
about how hard it is to actually get into that field and to work in that space and
Yeah.
to even talk about some of the things that he's working on and
Yeah.
to know that, we are in that space too.
Right.
Like
Right.
you don't always think about Black men when you're thinking about aerospace or working in for NASA and things. So that was amazing. And then two, we had the guest on that was in architecture, like and
Hmm.
talking about how unique that is and how even in a space like that, how you have to think about the way buildings are created and shaped and thinking
Yep.
about all the ways it impacts the Black community and other communities too.
Right.
Those are conversations that I, don't always get to have. And I
Yep.
think just understanding like how we're in those spaces and how we are able to kind of bring the lens of a Black man
Yep.
was pretty impactful. And of course there's more, but those are two that came up when I was just kind of thinking about that. What about
Sure.
you?
Yeah, for me, I honestly I know that we both know Thomas McKinney. He to me was one of those folks who really took, not that all of our guests did not, but he really went deep into how he felt about not only the questions we were asking. So I would ask a lot of folks to go back and listen to Thomas's episode because he's really thoughtful in the way he sort of looked at it holistically from the lens, his lens as a Black man, but also that perceived lens that folks see him as or see him as, or Black men in general. I thought it was super thoughtful from that perspective. And I honestly can't remember. I'm looking at it right now. I think it's episode 10. So it's episode 10 is Thomas McKinney. And I think that that was something that was really excited for me. And then I also look at it from a lot of the folks, and I won't pick one out specifically, but you were able to introduce me to a lot of folks that live and work in Alabama or whatnot. And those, honestly, those other than you are probably some of the first people I've ever spoken to from Alabama. So I think that for me, that was really cool to listen to because I think a lot of the things, there's some synergy in it. You start talking about being a family man or being dedicated to your faith or whatever that looks like. I think that was something that was consistent for me that I wanted to make sure I felt in line with some of the things that they were saying. And there clearly I don't get to Alabama. At all, really. I've only been there once. But it feels like even from Minnesota to Alabama, that being a Black man, although you're not a monolith in general, that they care about their family and they care about their work and they care about their community. And it was all consistent to how we live here, or how I live here, I should say. And it was exciting to hear some of that.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say likewise too, like being able to, like we said, introduce each other to the guys who, are doing some amazing things and,
Mhm.
not even realizing how close we are connected.
Yeah.
We all know about the 6 degrees of separation or maybe have heard about it. And it's
Hmm.
like to see that kind of come into play in real life. has been pretty amazing. And I really do think that, there are lots of impactful moments from season one.
Yeah.
And these are just a few. So I definitely
Yeah.
appreciate that too.
That's awesome.
Um, so um I'm gonna jump down for a second and then go back up to some other
Sure.
reflections. But could you talk a little bit? You talked about Thomas McKinney in his episode,
Mm-hmm.
but in your mind, can you think of another episode that might have been your favorite that that you
Yeah.
really enjoyed?
Yeah, what I really enjoyed was Clifton Loveloy. Clifton, he's the architect, young architect, right? So I think that there's part of me that when you start talking about him, and I know I don't even know if he's 30, to be honest. He might be 30.
Yeah.
But he not only being so accomplished, but being accomplished in a field of art, because I love looking at buildings. I love sort of just that looking at the architecture and the engineering of buildings and whatnot, or things in general, and to be responsible for that, or being aware that this is what you're going to school for. This you want to build buildings and change communities, because he's doing it for a different reason than just say I'm just going to build a building. He's looking at is how does that building fit in a community that I'm looking to sort of serve as well. Or how do you build something in community that sort of not only is accessible to folks, but it's a beauty to that community, and you're sort of creating that. So Clifton was one that for me I think was really the one of the more impactful ones, because it fell in line, or he fell in line as conversation of something that was really exciting to me about sort of just looking at sort of how do you change a community by building in that community, and that was something that was really exciting.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I really liked his too. Another one that I guess if I had to think about like one of my favorite ones was I really enjoyed talking with Reggie Torber, who was one of our
Mm,
first guests. And
hmm
for him to just kind of talk about his perspective, one, being someone who grew up the way he grew up, being able to kind of get to the height of his
Yeah.
athletic career by being a Super Bowl champion,
Yeah.
beating Tom Brady, like a lot of people can't say that they have that, but the majority of our conversation wasn't spent on that. Like we were
Right.
talking about, his faith and how he shows up for his family. He's
Right.
the president of a construction company, a black-owned
Right.
construction company. And I
Yeah.
think being able to show that, yes, when people think about black men, they think about athletes and workhorses and all this. He
Mm.
did that. He was able to be successful at that, but he was
Yeah.
able to also pivot and find
Yeah.
ways to transition into life after sports.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we always hear those negative stories of like an athlete who goes and they play in the NFL and then
Right.
they end up going bankrupt or they end up losing everything that they worked so hard to get.
Mm.
He's been able to sustain and build his family up. And, that was amazing to kind of be able to have that episode to be able to reflect and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he was inspiring as well. What would be some type of like feedback you'd give to like or from our listeners? Are you hearing some certain things from listeners that maybe we can sort of roll into season two?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, one of the things, thank you, one, for all the feedback that we've been getting because, we've gotten a lot of feedback whenever whether I'm at work, sometimes I might be at the gym,
Hmm.
just yesterday I was actually at a youth basketball tournament and one of the parents from a guy that I coached a couple years ago, she came up to me and was like, "Hey, I heard your podcast. It's been amazing," and blah blah blah. And I think the big feedback that I've been getting is, of course, people would like to hear more, because I know we've stayed within the 30
Yeah.
to 35-minute episodes, but I think some people are like, hey, you could do it for an hour and people will love to listen to it more. Or a
Cool.
lot of people are just saying that kind of like what you were just mentioning,
Yeah.
they haven't had the opportunity to sit and have conversations with other
Yeah.
black men to be able to hear our perspective and to learn more about how we think and how we view
Yeah.
family and how important it is for us to show up in our communities and things like that.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people have been appreciative of that, saying that it's important. to be able
Yeah.
to showcase that. So it
Yeah.
hopefully makes a little bit of progress when they are seeing someone that maybe they don't know, to
Yeah.
not prejudge them based off of the way they look or, their skin color.
Yeah. It was interesting because I had some feedback from a friend of mine, and this was a white lady. And she said something similar that we're doing something that's disrupting a narrative, right? We're changing it in a way that's kind of like, oh, okay, we're gonna fully embrace not only who we are, but who we want to talk to and those type of things. But we're sort of disrupting the general thought process that folks might have about Black men. And I think it's a unintended consequence, but I think it's actually something that's really fantastic because I don't necessarily consider myself a disruptor. You may consider yourself one, but I think part of being able to do this podcast has been something that says, yeah, what you think or what some people think about Black men and what they're all about, how they're wired, it just disrupts it, right? It changes that. And it may, similar to, could we make it longer? Could we have deeper conversations, longer conversations, hours of conversation? Well, sure. And I think part of it is kind of like understanding that that's what people want, right? So the feedback is, hey, so maybe periodically this, coming season, next season, we'll do something different, shake it up a little bit. But I think that that's great feedback to have, and it's relatively consistent. It wasn't just her, but it was also my mother and my sisters are also listening to it as well, which is kind of
Yeah.
cool. Yeah,
No, that's cool.
yeah,
So I think, it'd be interesting for me to kind of just share a little bit too with our listeners about, one of our most listened to episodes so far,
hmm
from season one, and then talk a little bit about our some of our podcast stats that I think is pretty cool that I like to share. So you mentioned the episode with Thomas McKinney. So that's been our
yeah.
most listened to episode. And, it
Oh,
speaks to kind
okay.
of what you actually said
Mm,
already. And I definitely encourage people to go back and listen to that one because, again, the answers that he kind of gave and the way he
hmm
kind of really, really dug deep, I think,
hmm hmm
showed. And, it was the most listened to episode so far. And, of course, we had a lot of episodes that were close. I'm
Sure.
trying to see if I can look at that really quick. So, like, Thomas McKinney was our first.
Yeah.
Uh, Second was the interview we did with Tim Harris.
Okay.
And then the third was our episode with Nate Carter. So like those
Oh,
are
okay.
our top three episodes from season
Yeah.
season one. And it's pretty cool
Yeah.
because all three of those guys had very unique
hmm
stories and
Yeah.
the way that they kind of share things with
hmm
us. So
Yeah.
and then another thing that I think is pretty neat, and I'd like to share this with our stats, is that although we are in Minnesota, and we, of course, have been focusing a lot on people in Minnesota, but also people where I grew up down south in Alabama and
Yeah.
surrounding areas, we actually have listeners all around the world. So,
Okay.
like looking at the stats, of course, we have a lot of people from North America, but we've gotten downloads in Europe, we've gotten downloads in Africa, we've gotten downloads in Asia, and we've gotten downloads over in Australia. So, and
Okay.
New Zealand. So
Okay.
it's amazing to know those are a couple of countries, but I mean, or a couple of continents, but some of the countries in there are Singapore, Canada, United Kingdom, Mexico, Philippines, Turks and Caicos, St. Kitts. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing to even know that we are getting
Yeah.
reach in those
Yeah.
spaces that, when we
Yeah.
started this, we were really focusing on Minnesota and focusing on where I
hmm
was from, but it's expanded. So I don't know if
Yeah.
you have any thoughts on that, but
Well, I did not even know that. I mean, I know that I know we had mentioned a few different things, but that's amazing to me because I think that there's part of it for us as we start to do this thing, on a more not only consistent basis, but the next year is that there's just opportunity, right? I mean, there's opportunity to sort of find quote unquote Black men from different countries and get them on the podcast, right? How's that perspective different? How do they see it in the countries and continents that they're on, and what does it feel like to be a black man in Australia, right? Or what does it feel like to be a black man in Singapore?
Right.
So I think those are conversations, knowing that there's folks out there that, maybe there's multiple people listening to it. Well, let's get out there and figure out a way to find who those people are. Um, get them on the podcast,
Yeah.
right? Or, I've always said, let's get on a plane and go talk to somebody somewhere else or something like that. But that'll take a bigger budget, but we'll figure it out. But I
Absolutely.
think that those are the fun things that when you start thinking about or looking at the stats and looking at the data and whatnot, you sort of say, okay, this is working, right? I mean, was it our goal, obviously, to sort of go global or international or any of those things? I don't, probably not. But I think that's always an opportunity, right? I mean, if there's an opportunity to do it and it makes sense and people are interested and engaged in the podcast, then I'm all for sort of speaking to as many black men as we can, no matter where they're at. So
Absolutely.
it's
No, yeah.
exciting.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that was cool. So I was like, that's good to be
Hmm.
able to share that. And I feel like, we wouldn't be making that kind of reach without the support of, the listeners and people sharing it and
Hmm.
people being able to kind of encourage us to keep going because, you know, you never know. Like there's no one that I know in Singapore. So somebody had to share it with someone out there.
Right. Right.
So to me, I just think
Yeah.
that speaks to like you're saying, just
Yeah.
us being able to kind of start with a small dream and vision to try
Yep.
to change that narrative about how people view us,
Yep.
and that reach is getting out there. So I'm
Right.
definitely appreciative of that.
Yeah. I think that I know you mentioned a couple of both the NASA careers, just different careers we've spoken to or spoken about as it relates to sort of the black men we've talked to. And I think that it's interesting because one of my favorite careers, which is really interesting, is Todd Western, who is he's technically, I think he's a donor advisor for Greater Twin Cities United Way, but he's also a black farmer,
Yeah,
right? And I think that part of being, and not only being a black farmer in general, but being specifically a black farmer is something I don't know too many of them, right? I think it's what I think the percentage of black farmers is single digits for sure.
right,
And I think that having that conversation with him, thinking about not only what he's providing for his family and the family-owned business that they've been running for decades, but it's just a career path and a career field that it goes back to, just working the land, right? Working a family business, teaching your son and their sons to sort of inherit and grow into something and leaving that legacy, right? So what does it look like to leave a legacy as a black man? Well, he's literally doing it, right? So I mean, it's one of those situations where, yeah, he has a quote unquote day job, but then his second job, I guess, if you will, or depending on how he ranks them, is really doing something that's sort of leaving that long-term generational legacy. And that's super inspiring to me as it relates to that particular career field. And just all the different guys we spoke to.
mm, yeah, yeah. I was trying to think if I could think of another one too,
Mhm.
but there's just been so many just throughout the year that I think it's interesting because that's one of the things we wanted to showcase is like, you can be black and be in any kind of field that you want to be in.
Yes.
We're not just limited to certain career fields or certain things like that. And
Right.
I believe we've been able to showcase that. Um, and just kind of looking back over the list here, thinking about the one with Joshua Cobb and
Mm.
how, here's someone that, you know, I met for the first time, and here he is, a two-time regional Emmy winning producer and
Right.
writer.
Right.
And, those aren't people you always get a chance to meet and also
Right.
have a conversation about. So I think for me, that was also one of my favorites to be able to
Yeah.
kind of sit and have those conversations and what I felt like was one of the most interesting people that we got to interview.
Right. And they're all super impressive, you know what I mean? I mean, I think that we see it as they're doing, amazing things, but it's just being able to sort of be in a space and sort of, I mean, we like to, I think we always say that our podcasts are more conversational, so we're not, it's not a deep dive, beat you up type of interview, But really what it is just learning about folks. And then I really, like you mentioned Josh as well. And I think that that's real. He's a really young guy. I mean, if he's 30, I'm shocked. If he, I don't even know. But to win an Emmy one time is a big deal. All right. And he's done it twice. So yeah, you're 100% right. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Exciting opportunity. Yeah.
So, what are you looking forward to as we get ready to, you know, start season two? Anything that you're looking forward to coming up?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm really looking forward to sort of just not only expanding what we're doing in the reach, like yeah, clearly now maybe looking at outside of the United States, but also just maybe some opportunities that we may have to go into some places, go into some different corporate offices, go into some on location, if you will, maybe post up at a barber shop or something and really have some conversations along the lines of being in person. I love Zoom, but I also like that energy that may be around a quote unquote live audience, if you will, of just sort of having that type of energy. So, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I agree. I think definitely continuing to do the Zoom because it gives us access to, like we just talked about, people that may not even be living
Mm,
within the United States. So being able to interview people from, different walks of life, different backgrounds, different countries, because yeah, I was surprised when I saw the stats or how many people from different countries were supporting the podcast. But I am also looking forward to being able to have some of those in-person sit-down discussions and maybe being able to, partner up and collaborate with organizations that may have like employee resource groups and,
right.
wanting to sit down and have talks with, Black men to, just
Yeah.
really tackle different topics that are affecting us.
Yeah.
I think having some of those mixed in with some of the Zoom and continuing with the audio
Yeah.
we'll just continue to strengthen the podcast, add something to it that, I think will continue to bring value to others. So I'm looking forward to all of those things in season two.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, what would you say to our listeners as we sign off for this final time in 2024 before we roll into 2025? What's one message you say to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say thank you for sure. Because again, Carl and I, we started this idea when we started talking about it, it was just an idea. It wasn't anything and tangible, and it wasn't something where we knew how it was going to be able to work with our schedules and all this stuff. But because of the love and the support and the feedback and the prayers, all the things that have been happening, it for
Right.
me is giving me the fuel to and the motivation to want to continue with the podcast. So I definitely would like to tell people thank you because we would not be at this
Yeah.
point if it hadn't been for the positive feedback that we've
Right.
been getting and support. So
Yeah.
and also I would say, we're looking to, always find ways to bring more value to what they're listening to. So if there's things that you want us to talk about, topics that are affecting Black men, please let us
Yeah.
know. We would love to be able to have episodes around some of those things and be able to bring more
Right.
content that's valued by all of our listeners. So, what about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for folks. I mean, I know that a lot of engagement comes through LinkedIn. I'd love for folks to sort of throw in a chat on our LinkedIn, maybe some brothers that we should talk to, right? To some figure out, hey, this is someone that I think is super interesting, or if you have a employee resource group and you want us to come in or maybe talk to some folks, just making sure that folks are really engaged, not only listening, downloading, subscribing, liking us and all those things for sure. We appreciate everyone that's done that already. And I also think that there's a great opportunity for us to partner with some more different folks, figure out ways that we can sort of not only do some uh, bigger, broader podcasts, but also looking at, maybe there's just we look at government agencies and there's lots of fields we haven't touched yet, right? So let's figure out ways to sort of get the audience engaged in that, get listeners engaged in that, and sort of throw out some suggestions. And we read everything, so it's an opportunity for us to really listen to the feedback we're getting and sort of put it into some of the pods.
Absolutely. So I think that brings us to a close. And again, we just want to thank everyone. I know we've said that a few times throughout this reflection episode, but every like, share, download, whatever it was that you did for the podcast or to share with some other people, we truly appreciate that, because we wouldn't be at this point without any of that stuff. So we look forward to a continued sustainable season 2. And as Karl already mentioned, please reach out, let us know how we can partner with you or your organization. If there's things you want to do, if you want to bring us out, let us come and do a live podcast. We love to do that. So I just want to say thank you, wishing everyone a happy holiday season and, a even happier new year. So thank you for being a part of the podcast.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.